I mean, as you said, the cases that we chose to feature in the book, so we visited 30, really more than 30 schools, but we spent extended time at 30 different schools, and we chose 4 of those where we really dove in the book and used them as cases to illustrate some of what we were trying to understand. And so this, as you name it, the 4 schools that we spent a lot of time in and we write a lot about in the book are very, very different culturally from each other, not just in terms of like the ethnic and racial backgrounds of the students that they serve, but in terms of the school culture and the instructional culture that those institutions had either intentionally or unintentionally created. And so it ranged from a progressive project-based school, socioeconomically rich and racially diverse school, where I would characterize the cultures at those schools as really focused on belongingness, for adults as well as for students, very focused on trying to help students connect who they are outside of school to what they do inside of school, and by giving students some agency and choice over what they do in school, and what, for example, what they work on for a given project, what audiences they might choose to pitch their projects to. They give students opportunities to really position themselves as producers in their community, like doing things of value for each other or for their broader communities, for their families, for their schools. And I think that really helped in that case to sustain a school culture where kids were seen as creative, agentic, productive members of the community, and adults too, right? Like we write a lot about symmetry and how in the powerful schools we spent time at, there was sort of there was a parallel stance that held true for adults as well as for kids. And so in that same community, like teachers were seen as creative, agentic folks who had, the school gave them a lot of choice and agency over what kinds of curriculum they designed. So that's one version of a school culture. We also saw a school on the other end of the spectrum that was very tight and very focused on sort of micromanagement in service of what they saw as producing really high level academic outcomes. This is a school serving predominantly low income Black and Brown students, and whose goal was really to have those Black and Brown students passing AP exams, doing well on state tests and getting into colleges at equal or higher rates than their white affluent suburban counterparts. And they were doing that. They were successful in that endeavor. Their culture was one of efficiency and like a real focus on goals, right? So like there was sort of less of a focus on the now and more of a focus on where are we trying to get to. And so students and adults in that school talked about how they weren't always happy with the rigor and the intensity and the sort of hyper focus on academic achievement, but they all had kind of come to some shared agreements that like this will get us where we want to go collectively. And they had a sense of high efficacy because they were getting to those places, right? That the school had outstanding scores by comparison to their counterparts and so on. So that culture was much more, I would say it was less like sort of immediately empowering for kids, but there was a kind of like tacit agreement there that like we're in this for the long game is what matters. And we are sort of willing, though not joyful about the fact that sometimes this takes, sacrificing our pleasure in the moment to just kind of make sure that we're getting where we want to go. And that culture similarly held true for adults and for kids. So, shifting cultures, like the schools that we saw that we thought were really promising in achieving their own goals had coherent cultures, to your point. Like they had a clear set of goals and values, and they had routines and designs in their schools that echoed those assumptions for everybody in the schools. That's not true of all schools at all. Like the cases we put forward I would argue, are much more coherent schools on the whole than most schools that I saw and where I have spent time. A lot of schools I don't think have particularly coherent or deliberate cultures, nor are they like designed environments, really. Like they're the school in zip code XYZ that has been there, for 70 years and has gone through various phases of development, but has never really had opportunities to become a mission-driven, value-driven, kind of coherent, designed institution.
Mm-hmm. So what, you kind of answered this, but what makes a difference between these schools with the coherent culture? I mean, you said it's a mission-driven institution, but how does that happen? How do they develop such a coherent culture?
Yeah, well, this is murky territory, right? I'm not a charter advocate per se. In fact, I often say to people, I wish we lived in a world where we didn't have to have charter schools. If I could wave my wand and go back to the start, like I would not land us where we are. But I do think that most of the schools that we chose to feature that had really coherent designs were some type of special school, e.g. they were small schools that had been fairly recently founded. So magnets, charters, in-district charters, and so on. And while I sympathize with a lot of the arguments that people make about some of the problems that our assumptions about market-based school choice have, I also do think that the real advantage of charters and small schools of choice is that there's the opportunity to like incubate a school with a set of beliefs and values in mind from the very start, and to make deliberate decisions about the design of those schools, all the way down to who you hire, how you use your time, how you set up your space. I mean, everything ideally can echo and be deliberately, consciously a result of that design. I think it's much harder. Now you can argue with what a design should be, what should be the core values of our schools. And you can see across the cases in our book that like there are very different choices about what to design around, but at least there's the opportunity to actually design and provide students a coherent experience. Whereas a lot of schools, they're working uphill, because not only are they really constrained, but they're huge. They, like to your point, there's each pocket of the school is echoing some moment in time where some curriculum or new set of values came through, and they're not all aligned to each other. They're very loosely organized. So it's just a harder thing to do in a space like that. So it's not that I don't think that great, deep, rich learning can happen in sort of traditional public schools. In fact, we saw plenty of it. It's just harder as a whole institution to cohere around a given design. I think it takes a lot more work than starting from scratch.